Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we are going to be talking about wind energy, saving and restoring the Stanislaus River, and campaign money for political elections with my guest, Kevin Wolf. He is the CEO of Wind Harvest and was formerly their COO. He has also been the co-founder of In-Street Co-Housing in Davis, California, and the Ocean Iron Fertilization Alliance. And he has also received the Paddler Magazine's River Saver of the Year award. He is also currently treasurer of Restoring the Stanislaus River and chair of California Clean Money Action Fund. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on the program again.
Thank you, Nancy.
We have been environmental activists for decades, and while we work to try to save the Stanislaus River, and we're going to talk about that beautiful river in California near Yosemite National Park, we are first going to talk about your current endeavors to harvest mid-level wind in California. Wind energy has changed since the windmills that we think about in the past. They look different. They are different. How do you describe the current technology?
Oh, these wind turbines are just magnificent machines. They are enormously efficient. They provide some of the lowest cost energy in the world. In these windy places, they're going up more and more every single year. It's an enormous industry and doing a great deal of benefits for reducing the amount of fossil fuels being produced in the world. What's been missing is that these three-bladed horizontal axis turbines where the drive shaft is horizontal and has three blades like a propeller, that's a traditional turbine. They cannot operate in turbulent wind. And when you get near the ground, the wind becomes very turbulent. So those types of horizontal turbines, axis turbines, are raised high above the ground and are spread far apart from each other. And in places like the San Gorgonio Pass, out near Palm Springs, that leaves a lot of amazingly windy land and resources unused underneath the tall turbines.
In the 1990s, I did an Emmy-nominated documentary, one of the first on wind energy in the United States. And it was an innovative technology back then. How has it changed in the last few decades?
It has become more and more sophisticated and less costly to make. And, of course, they get bigger and bigger, these turbines. And now they're going offshore. And they're able to float some of these turbines in deep water. It's an amazing technology, but it does not have the capacity to handle turbulence, which is why we have been working for a long time to develop a vertical axis turbine that can handle the turbulent conditions near the ground.
Solar energy has taken off. We get calls all the time to put solar panels on our homes, our offices, schools, buildings. Yet I don't get anybody calling me saying, put up a wind turbine on my roof. Is that possible?
Oh, it's certainly possible, but humans have decided they don't like to live in windy areas. So most people, where they live, it's not windy. And the energy in the wind is the cube of the wind speed. And so that means as soon as the wind starts to drop, the energy plummets. And where, like all of Los Angeles, almost every city in California, it's not windy. Yeah, people might think it's windy, but it's not windy compared to the San Gorgonio Pass or these ridge lines up in the mountains or these other places where it's enormously windy. So the reason why you don't see somebody trying to sell you a turbine for your roof is because it's not windy there.
Therefore, the wind energy companies like yours are building on sites where they provide wind and then sell it to the utility companies and it goes into the grid?
That is the predominant one. There's two ways. One is into the distributed grid. So, for example, down in the Anza Hills near the Anza Borrego Desert, there's a very windy set of hills, but they can't put the tall turbines up for all kinds of reasons. But they can put in about 100 of our turbines, 6 megawatts or so of our turbines in those hills. And those hills are pretty phenomenal. The wind blows almost all night long, and it tapers off in the morning. And so solar, of course, stops when the sun sets. But wind in California, these windy resources, they blow well past sunset. And so they provide a way of getting us renewable energy without needing batteries.
In other words, when the turbine is creating wind energy, it goes into the electrical system. It's not stored in any kind of battery system?
Yeah, well, it blows after sunset. And so when the solar, if you want to produce solar energy after sunset, that solar energy has to be stored in a battery. And then the battery releases it after sunset. But for wind, especially between April and October in California, the wind blows at night and after sunset. Starts in the afternoon around noon and then blows all the way until about 4 or 5 in the morning. And so it provides a very good complement to solar energy.
What happens when there is no wind? The grid would have to provide energy from other sources.
Yeah, same thing when it's a cloudy day on solar. The grid has to provide energy from other sources. And so that is, the more that we have these multiple sources of energy, solar and wind and batteries and geothermal and these other ways of producing renewable energy, and the more we have the grid connecting them all together, the more we'll be able to handle when it's cloudy in Southern California, but it's windy out in the San Gorgonio Pass. Now we have a complementary situation in which we can make up for the other one's lack of production.
You've mentioned San Gorgonio Pass, but there are other places in California that have wind. Where are the primary sites? Anza?
Anza's a small area, but the biggest wind resource areas are the Tehachapi Pass, out near the Mojave as Highway 52 comes out of Tehachapi down into the desert. That is an enormous wind resource area for California. The other one is the Southern Solano Montezuma Hills, where the wind comes through the Golden Gates of San Francisco Bay, up the Carquinez Straits, and then right over the Montezuma Hills as it rushes up to the very hot northern Sacramento Valley. So that northern Sacramento Valley creates a low pressure area as the heat rises up and it draws that cold air up the Sacramento River and then right over those hills and creates a very good wind resource. So almost all of California wind resource areas, the Altamont Pass near San Jose, the Tehachapi Pass, the Pacheco Pass down in Merced County, the San Gorgonio Pass, and then the San Diego Pass way down there on Highway 8 as you come out of San Diego, all are these cooler ocean air moving into hot areas, and that drives the wind speed. But it's only in these very narrow geographical areas where there's passes or hills that allows the wind to funnel into the hot area, and that's where California's wind resource areas are.
You're focused on wind energy in California. What about the rest of the country? And where is the windiest part of North America?
Oh, Wyoming, the island of Hawaii, most of the western United States, New Mexico, they all have fantastic places where it's extremely windy near the ground. The island of Barbados and the Eastern Antilles in the Caribbean are fantastically windy places. Costa Rica has some of the greatest wind resources in the world. So these are all these amazingly windy spots that cannot add any more tall turbines, need our shorter vertical axis turbines.
Are the wind turbines on private property, government property? Where exactly are they located? I recently read about a rancher who wasn't doing too well with his cattle ranch. He wanted to put wind energy on his ranch land, and yet the community objected to it.
Well, in San Diego, it's by the Kumeyaay Indian tribe, Native American tribe down there that owns the land, and that there's a big wind farm there. The land in the San Gorgonio Pass near Palm Springs is almost all privately held land, though there is some Bureau of Land Management land there. The land in southern Solano County is all privately held. So most of the land is privately held desert or ranch land.
Do we need any more environmental laws, propositions to make wind energy feasible?
There is a very big benefit for renewable energy if the grid was more connected. so that when it was windy in California and we had excess wind, we could ship it out across the country and vice versa. So that would be one of the best things we could do for being able to make use of a renewable energy resource of solar and wind, is a more connected grid. And that takes new transmission lines. And there is a lot of places where transmission lines are blocked because of local counties and local property owners stopping them from being built.
You're just one wind energy company. How many are out there, and how much energy can be provided to the infrastructure through wind?
So let's just focus on mid-level wind. We are the only company that is moving into this space. We think as soon as we prove that our turbines can handle the turbulence near the ground, we will see the big ones like GE and Siemens and Vestas moving into creating their own turbines for this mid-level wind resource. But until it's proven that you can actually create a turbine tough enough to handle the turbulence, no one else is going to enter this space. And that space is enormous. There's about 20% of the wind farms around the world have excellent mid-level wind resources. That is something like 150 gigawatts, 150,000 megawatts of the easiest to produce energy. This land is already zoned for wind. They already have the roads in place. They have the infrastructure in place. They're just waiting for a technology that can make use of the excellent winds closer to the ground. The amount of energy in the world, I think, is somewhere around 5% is now being produced by wind, and it's expected to double to 10% in the next number of years.
Wind energy is considered a renewable energy. It's considered a more ecological form of energy than coal-fired power plants or nuclear power plants, which have many serious pollution problems. I don't hear about too much pollution caused by wind, but I do hear often about wind turbines killing our wildlife, particularly the birds. How do you handle that?
That's an interesting problem. Yeah, these horizontal axis propeller-type turbines are two-dimensional, and wildlife did not evolve to see two-dimensional objects where the blades, tips, are traveling at 150 to 200 miles an hour. So it's just by the kind of the nature of animal evolution that they have difficulty seeing and tracking a two-dimensional object. Our turbines are three-dimensional. They're more like a tree. The ornithologists say that birds will see and avoid our three-dimensional turbines much better than they avoid the two-dimensional tall turbines. But to put it in context, I think they're talking something, in the hundreds of thousands of birds killed a year in all the wind farms in the country, whereas there's, hundreds of millions of birds killed by cars, and even more killed by glass buildings where the birds fly into them, and even more killed by cats.
And more birds killed by pesticides and insecticides and other chemicals.
And loss of habitat. And so the poor damage to wildlife populations and bird populations are not by the tiny amount that might fly into a turbine's rotor. It's really about these other major killers of birds that we need to reduce.
I'm not a technological expert, but maybe those two-dimensional wind turbines should have nets around them. Is that possible?
No, not possible. These blades are 60 meters long. So the two blades together are longer than a football field. And there's no way you could put a net around them, and then the birds would get caught in the net anyway. So what they're doing is areas where there are things like bald eagles or golden eagles or rare and endangered birds, they now have high-definition motion detection cameras and radar systems that can tell a bird by its flight pattern and know that it's an eagle that does not see the tall turbines. And as the eagle comes closer to the tall turbines that it's coming close to slows down and stops. And then when that eagle flies by, the turbine starts up again. So that is one of the ways they're solving the problem of the tall turbines harming wildlife.
So they're aware that it's a problem, and they are finding new technological solutions, apparently.
Oh, yeah.
There are other objections to wind turbines, particularly those who love to see the ocean, and people don't want to see wind turbines out in the oceans. They don't want their views ruined. Is that a serious problem?
Yeah, they got views ruined by offshore oil wells all over from Seal Beach up to Santa Barbara. There are these harms of oil rigs up our coast for generations. They've been there. So where they're thinking of installing turbines off the coast, they are going to be slightly visual, especially if you brought out your binoculars. You might see them. They're pretty far offshore and they're pretty thin. It's going to be hard to see them, but they probably will be seen in these places. Now, our turbines are only 60 to 80 feet tall, about as tall as a tall telephone pole. When they're placed on a hillside or in an area, they're just not nearly as visible as a turbine that is 400 feet tall, which is what these new turbines are coming in at. So that is an advantage of these much shorter, compact, vertical axis turbines. They are not going to be seen as much.
It's great to hear about the new innovations in wind energy, and we'll talk more about this renewable energy source when we return in a moment with my guest, Kevin Wolf.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with Kevin Wolf, who is the CEO of Wind Harvest. You're a company that is trying to get investors to put money into making wind available. What's involved with that? How much does it cost?
Wind Harvest has raised $20 million, brought its technology all the way to the end of the commercialization process. But we still have two last steps to go: international certification, and then getting enough turbines in the ground that banks will finance the projects that utilize our turbines and let our turbines be used as capital for collateral for the loan. So that is the basics of where we've been. It's very unusual for a company to be still privately held and have a utility-scale renewable energy product and have not been bought up by one of the major corporations. We're a unique company in that way. And the last raise of capital is to bring us through that final part of the commercialization process.
Wind is just one element of trying to make a better ecological lifestyle. We need to go to the renewable energies. But at the same time, we need to save our ecosystems and our wildlife. And I met you back in the 1970s when we wanted to save the Stanislaus River, a gorgeous wild river that they wanted to dam because they say dams provide hydropower and we need them. But don't we need wild rivers too?
Oh, yes. I met the founder of Wind Harvest, George Wagner, when I was volunteering with Friends of the River on taking VIPs like George. He was the founder of the League of Conservation Voters. So I took him on the river, and we were lamenting. This is 1981. We're lamenting how we know coal's bad, and we knew that global warming was coming, and we knew that 3 Mile Island had just occurred, and nuclear was going to be a big problem. And there was nothing like solar. And the only remaining way to get clean energy was dam the remaining rivers of the country. And that's when George said around the campfire that, oh no, there is wind turbines. Windmills, back in the old days, they'd pump water out of Holland and they'd mill corn and wheat. Well, that can also just turn generators. And our company's been working on that. And it was such a wonderful thing to realize, there's an alternative besides damming rivers. So that was my initial interest in getting into wind energy, was from wanting to not have the pressures to only way to provide renewable energy was to dam our remaining rivers.
Sadly, too many rivers have been dammed, but now there's a movement to remove dams. You are treasurer of restoring the Stanislaus River. Does that mean the dam will get removed and we might have a wild river again?
All dams are going to eventually crumble. That's just the nature of a physically made structure, especially one in the time of climate change. For example, on the Stanislaus River right now, the New Melones Dam, a massive earth-filled dam. The reservoir is high because of last year's amazingly wet winter. And there is a prediction that this winter could be as wet as last winter. If that occurs, they will not be able to remove enough water out of New Melones Dam if a big flood occurs, atmospheric river lands up there on the Stanislaus watershed, and the water would go right over the top of the dam and erode the dam. That's faced on the Feather River. Most California rivers are all facing this threat of extreme climate change-induced droughts and floods are going to affect dams, and they're going to wear them out and likely destroy them sooner than they otherwise would. But all dams are going to eventually have to become obsolete. They just will not be able to continue. Maybe a couple hundred years, it may be 10, 20 years. For example, the Pillsbury Dam on the Eel River is long past its useful life, and it's likely to come down here in the next 10 years. And that's what we'll see with more and more dams on rivers as they become clearly unuseful.
We were active in trying to get the public to vote on a proposition on the ballot. I think it was poorly worded because you had to vote yes to want to remove the dam or no to save the river. It was very confusing to people. And that was an effort because the legislature isn't doing the job that it should in saving the environment. We have people in politics, and yet we need to know where are their dollars coming from. You're chair of the California Clean Money Action Fund. It seems to me important that we know if the politicians are getting money from the businesses that are polluting or planning to destroy the environment. Is that what you're all about?
I helped start the Water Conservation and Efficiency Initiative, and with a bunch of river guides and others, we collected the signatures to put that ballot measure on the November 1982 California ballot. And then we watched as the election came closer. We were ahead in the polls, and then the ads started to appear on TV. And it showed food disappearing off of the Safeway shelves, saying, if this initiative passes, we won't have enough to eat. But it did not say who was behind the ads. It was Prudential Life Insurance, which owned 100,000 acres of land in the state of California. It was against it. It was a lot of large corporations. And it was infuriating. And then I helped on Forest Forever. I helped on the big oil initiatives. They all got slaughtered by dark money coming out against them in massive ads where you could not know that it was Chevron and Valero and others that were paying these ads. So I stopped working on initiatives and I started volunteering with the California Clean Money Fund, and I've now been working on that for almost 20 years. We ended up finally in 2018, we passed the California Disclose Act. And that forces these ads that show at the last 5 seconds of a ballot measure ad to who really paid for the ad, a person, a corporation, or a union. No more fake name organizations. And then we passed it for petition gathering and for social media. And now we've passed it for the Ballot Disclose Act, which says on the 75-word title and summary who supports and who opposes these ballot measures and put it in the ballot itself, because so many people make their decision on whether to vote yes or no against a ballot measure on a 75-word title and summary that can be very difficult to understand. So this has all been leading to the ability to pass major environmental initiatives that are going to be opposed by the big corporations and have a chance of passing them because we will know who they are and we'll see that, oh, the League of Women Voters supports this. I'm going to support it. So that is where we set it up. And now we finally have gotten that done. That last one passed last year. And I think you'll see a lot more very large ballot measures that have a chance to, for example, tax plastics or tax big oil or do other kinds of actions that we could provide the resources and the funding in the state of California to do the kind of restoration that is needed, especially with this ever worsening climate problems.
How many former wild rivers in the United States need to be restored?
The big ones are things like Lake Powell, and Glen Canyon Dam is no longer needed in this conditioning of climate change. So that dam should come down, and that silt behind that dam should go and benefit the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. So that is one of the very biggest dams that should come down right today. Oh, there's probably 100 dams, all the dams on the Columbia River that were built to have barges move along for wheat. Well, those are not needed. What we need is a salmon to come back. And the hydroelectric power can be replaced by solar and wind. So those are two of our major rivers in the country, in the western United States, in which those dams are not needed.
Why do we need wild rivers?
Oh, for our hearts, for nature, for our sense of connection to the world, to have the salmon swim and to know that the fish have a place to live and all kinds of stuff. The Stanislaus River is just north of Yosemite National Park, and it flows through the gold country towns of Sonora and Angels Camp as it moves into the San Joaquin Valley near Modesto. That river was the only limestone river in the western United States, and that limestone river canyon is now a bathtub of water behind the New Melones Dam.
We certainly have a lot of problems to deal with. As an activist, you have really worked on many different issues because in the long run, they all come together to trying to save our planet, save the wildlife, the ecosystems, the humans on the planet. I find it interesting that you were co-founder of the In-Street Co-Housing Unit in Davis, California. You were co-founder of the Ocean Iron Fertilization Alliance. Explain what that's about.
We have a problem with ever-increasing CO2 levels. We're above 420 right now, and humans have never lived above 300 parts per million. And what we are facing is such a heat and ocean rise with ever-increasing CO2 levels that we are really endangering everything on the planet. And what we have to do is remove CO2. We cannot just have reduction in emissions, because a reduction in emissions stabilizes the CO2 at above 400 parts per million. And if we meet the Paris Accord, which we are not on track to do, we'll stabilize it at 450 parts per million. Well, that's horrible. And there needs to be a massive effort right now to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. The best way to do it is the way nature has done it for millions of years. And our ice ages have been tracked with ice core samples, and basically it's volcanoes stimulate the ice age because the volcanoes spew out a lot of iron, and the iron stays up in the clouds for sometimes a year or two, and it creates a massive increase in phytoplankton. A limiting factor for phytoplankton in the ocean is a lack of iron. When there is enough iron out there across the ocean, phytoplankton blooms and it sucks CO2 out of the atmosphere. So that is probably the fastest and the most ecologically beneficial way to remove CO2 is to create phytoplankton blooms by feeding the ocean with missing iron. As we have changed how, for example, in the Australian desert has now growing grasses because they figured out there was trace metals missing there, and now hundreds of thousands of acres of desert have been turned into grassland. That has reduced the amount of dust that blows off the Australian desert into the Indian and Arctic Oceans. And that means there's less phytoplankton growth there. And that means there's less CO2 being removed from the atmosphere. So here we are changing the way the planet delivers dust and iron out into the ocean, and we need to do it ourselves. We need to go out there and replace it so that we can stimulate that phytoplankton growth, restore our fisheries in the process, because that phytoplankton is the base of the food chain that feeds the fish, that feeds the whales, that feeds the krill, all those kinds of things. One of the things that the killing of millions of whales over the last 200 years, those whales are the major way in which nutrients are brought up to the surface from down below that feed the phytoplankton. So now we have so much fewer whales and we have so much less nutrient moving up to the surface. We've got ourselves a mess out there because of what humans have done. And now humans have to go out there into the ocean and fix it by adding iron back in where it's missing. And that's what the Ocean Iron Fertilization Alliance is working on.
Your website, windharvest.com, has pictures of these turbines and the locales and how people can get involved.
Yes.
I am so pleased that you have continued your environmental activism in so many different arenas over these past few decades. You and I both loved wild rivers, and we have expanded our activism to get into politics, to get into so many other causes that are all really related to saving this planet, saving humans, saving the ecosystems, saving the wildlife. I'd like to thank you so very much for all your good work. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you. I'm happy to talk with you anytime, Nancy, and you're doing great work yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. I have been speaking with Kevin Wolf, CEO of Wind Harvest. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Pearlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.